Welcome to the Nuclear Snail channel. So, a lot of you have been asking me to make a video about post-apocalyptic weapons. So here it is. What kind of a post-apocalyptic weapon would fit what kind of a setting? Because the post-apocalyptic is a large setting with many different facets to it. And what kind of a weapon would fit what kind of a character? I'm gonna discuss this question today, or these questions, by showing you my gigantic collection of post-apocalyptic hardware that I have accumulated over the years. It's really ungodly big. I don't know if we even have the time to talk about every one of those items, but at least briefly. So, before we start, keep in mind all the items I'm about to show you are legal for me to own where I live. So whatever you get or make sure that it is legal for you where you live. Also, even if it is legal, if you are going to be working on something like this on your porch and people see you, someone might call the police. So keep that in mind. People do not know this is cosplay for you. They might think you're up to no good and you might still get in trouble even if it is legal. So stay legal. Be sensible, and whatever you build, also make sure it's safe for the purposes that you're building it for. A lot of guns you will see, or actually all of them, are airsoft shells without internals. And this thing, for example, is a scratch build from raw materials prop of a Gauss rifle. I have a separate video about that. So in this video I'm not going to be talking about how I made each one of those. I'm just going to be talking about, well, if it was real, for what kind of character would it make sense in what kind of a post-apocalyptic setting. So let's start with the one I have in my hand right now, the sniper shotgun. Yes, it was my intention to make a sniper shotgun looking prop. It has this really nice get slugged decal here, and I've attached something that looks like a big scope on top. This is not as stupid as you think it is, because lower tech scopes, for example early scopes, were not as powerful regarding magnification compared to their size. Some early models of scopes, and you could imagine in a low-tech situation where you don't have all the components available, where you have to improvise, someone with understanding of optics but not too much stuff to go around might make a low-tech scope. This might be like a 2x or 3x or 4x magnification with a pretty bad side picture. And 3x magnification is not that unreasonable for a shotgun, especially when shooting slugs or some other sort of more precise projectiles, especially if it's not a smooth bore. So this is not that stupid. And having a sort of a suppressor on it would also make sure that it's not that loud. It wouldn't make it whisper quiet, but it would make it destroy your ears just a tiny bit less. So there is that. Attached a bunch of junk to it to make it look more post-apoc and improvised. And here are also some spots for additional ammo. And as far as firearms go, I think shotguns are some of the most viable, most realistic and plausible ones to go around in a, let's call it, average post-apocalyptic setting. A shotgun can be very, very robust. So shotguns definitely deserve, in my opinion, one of the top spots for firearms in post-apocalyptic settings. This Gauss rifle, I'm not gonna talk too long about it. I have a dedicated video about it, you can watch that. This right here, in an average post-apocalyptic setting, would be definitely an elite weapon, because it would need expensive batteries, it would need expensive electronics, and it looks like it's purpose-made by some sort of a faction that has the skills and the technology to make something like this. So it would definitely be a devastating weapon for an elite soldier, mercenary, adventurer, what have you, in an average post-apocalyptic setting. Now, it could also be a very low-tech weapon in a sci-fi setting, where some backwoods rebel faction makes those in their backyard, while the real tough guys have like laser phaser super rifles that look sleek and sci-fi. But in an average post-apocalyptic setting, I think this would be an elite weapon, and a Gauss rifle would definitely, well, it's a Gauss rifle. What else can I say? I also have a regulator here that is supposed to allow the user to set it between whisper quiet, below sound barrier, like subsonic shots, and full power shots. And of course the Gauss rifle ammunition, as long as it has a magnetic part, could contain any sort of payload. So again, advantages: devastating, high-tech, precise, all of that. Disadvantages: it would be very expensive and hard to get, and also, depending on how it's built, difficult to maintain. So not a beginner weapon, more of a something that you get in the last levels of a game. Let's move on, staying with firearms, to assault rifles. Now this one right here you've seen me use many times for many pictures. If they have the ammo, if they have the capacities. Not as much as with the Gauss rifle, but still a very high maintenance weapon, which would, in my opinion, in the average apocalypse, require some spare parts. And yes, some factions would sit on hordes of replacement parts, like replacement barrels and other parts that just die over time for assault rifles, but some others would not. So this sort of thing, and also its ammunition, also all of the chemicals needed to produce all of this stuff would be really, really scarce. So assault rifles would be also an elite weapon and very expensive. Here is another one, a G36 cheap airsoft shell. Super light because there is nothing in it. Also with a rust effect, which a real G36 doesn't have or wouldn't have, because a real G36 is plastic. So is this. Anyway, I digress. Something like this, also a good example of a shorter assault rifle. When we just compare those weapons, firearms in general, to lower tech weapons that one would find in the apocalypse, those are super devastating. I don't think many people understand just how much of an advantage this is. Like, given enough ammunition, two dudes with assault rifles could take out legions, basically, given a good position and stuff like that, okay? Depending on the situation. Like, in some situations it wouldn't be that much of an advantage. For example, if you have like 5 people near you attacking you with spears, it doesn't matter if their spears are just sharpened sticks, they would still kill you. But if you have enough distance, this is so much better than bows, crossbows, thrown weapons, everything else. Firearms would just rule everything if someone has firearms. And the thing about those is that as time passes in the apocalypse, as I've said, parts of them would become less and less available, and ammunition as well. So the way that most games and shows and stuff portray firearms, and especially the amount of ammo still available for some reason, that's on par with how much gas is still available in Mad Max movies. It's just for our entertainment. It's not realistic whatsoever. But it's cool. Here is an FN 2000 airsoft shell. Really cool. Compact. As far as bullpups go, this one is one of my favorites. Doesn't really annoy me all that much, unlike most bullpups. In handling, that is. I think bullpups look super cool, but are a pain in the ass to handle. Now, when it comes to firearms, there are long ones, like this M14, and that would of course be great for taking out targets at distance. And there are shorter ones, such as this M4, of the stuff I'm showing you today, this one is the only one that still is actually a functional airsoft. This used to be my version 1 Gauss rifle a long time ago for more just dystopian setting. It had like Gauss rails here, but underneath it's like below 0.5 joule airsoft, but it still runs. I could actually play with it. I think the bucking is dead by now, but you know. So a short one like this would be also great for characters that have other professions than fighter. Because let's say you're an engineer or something like that in a post-apocalyptic world. Carrying something like this, you're still useful to your squad. And don't bash me for holding it on the mag, I like it this way. I can also do C-clamp, of course. So with this you're still useful to your squad. But you can just carry it easily, you can put it away, it's not getting in your shit. Well, something like this, well, of course you can also put it away and stuff, but this is long, this is much more cumbersome. It, of course, is gonna be much more useful at a distance, but when we're talking about character design, the length matters. The M4 platform is my absolute favorite of all time. It's so modular, it's so versatile, but at the same time the base of the M4 is extremely comfortable. There is no other gun better than M4 when it comes to ergonomics, in my opinion. This is also an airsoft, so this is not modified at all. Pistols would also be very useful. I think especially in America, the 9mm caliber, like that would last a lot. I mean, the amount of bullets that are already out there until they are depleted. And by the way, same goes for the 22 long rifle caliber weapons. While they're not the super duper man-stopping blah, and they are definitely not your 5.56 M4 standard army rifle, 22 caliber weapons would be very, very useful for hunting, also for fighting actually, because the ammunition for a 22 caliber weapon is so light and so easy to carry compared to everything else that's out there for firearms, and it still packs enough punch if you hit your target right. 22 is deadly. It's just less deadly than some bigger calibers, duh, but when we compare it to bows, for example, for the most part, I rather have a 22 caliber gun with enough ammunition. It's much more compact. That's another huge advantage of firearms over bows and such. They are much more compact and easier to handle. Like the amount of force you have to exert. Sure, in a firefight you have to move and get cover and peek out of cover and like get a good position, stuff like that. It's by no means a walk in the park, but in the end, you just aim it and pull the trigger. With a bow, or with a thrown weapon, or with something else that you power by your muscles, you have to put all of that kinetic energy into the weapon first, before it can do any damage to your target. So that's another enormous advantage of firearms. Then let's move on to other projectile weapons. Bows. Now this is like a children's bow with compound cams. And this actually shoots. It just doesn't have too much of a draw weight, and you will see that here is sort of a scope. This is not as stupid as it looks. Again, compared to a bullet, an arrow flies much more of a curve. But given that you have zeroed in the scope to a certain distance, why not? It's just not something that we see a lot of times on real bows, because the same very thing could be done by easier means and lower tech means, and you don't really need that much of an aiming device. But as far as just cool fantasy design goes, I think my girlfriend did a good job on this bow here. Now this one doesn't have any cams, and this one is just a recurve bow, just. An advantage of a recurve bow is, well, it's lower tech, it's just basically a spring, and you could make some simple kind of bow from a car spring, from skis, and there is really not that much to break. When you compare it to something with cams, such as this third bow that I have here, Well, it has advantages, but there is also so much more stuff that could break about this. We'll get to this one in a sec. This one right here, it doesn't have a huge draw weight. The thing about bows in the post-apocalyptic setting is, just like in medieval fantasy settings, portrayal of this stuff in movies, usually you have some scrawny character with not a lot of muscles and stuff, pulling bows and hitting people. You need a lot more draw weight than what I have here to really perform well in warfare, or in adventuring for that matter. Like this, like, I'm not saying it's not deadly, it could be, but so something with a lot more draw weight would be nice. Something like 100 pounds or something like this. Medieval warbows would be 100 pounds or more sometimes, so that's what we're talking about here. And talking accuracy, this would require some exercise. And of course, when we have a simpler bow like this, the more you draw it out, the more difficult it gets to hold it. You do not get let off like with a compound bow. You don't get compound bow acceleration advantages. So compound bows are the higher tech version, but they are also, as a drawback, harder to maintain because of this. I'm gonna draw this out after putting on my protective glasses here. I know I have goggles on the head, but I don't see with those because they're dark. Because the string here is so worn out, this is actually very dangerous right now to draw this out. Now this gives me a really nice let off. I'm not holding it where I should here. And I can hold this for a long time. And when I let go, it gives a lot of acceleration to the arrow. So compound bows would be very, very powerful because unlike with bullets where you need weird chemicals and stuff to make the ammunition, for making an arrow, if they could do it in medieval times, they will probably be able to do it in the post-apocalypse. But making a good arrow also takes quite a lot of skill. You need good wood or other materials. Here I have carbon fiber. Those would be difficult to make in the post-apocalypse, but wooden arrows, why not? Just like in the medieval times, arrows and bows would be a very popular choice, especially lower tech bows, because they would be easy to make, they would be easy to maintain, comparatively speaking, at least compared like to a Gauss rifle or an assault rifle. Again, as they did in medieval times, so they would in the post-apocalypse. Here we have field tips on these two arrows, and here we have a broadhead. So these ones would be for target practice or for piercing armor a bit better than this, although I'm not sure about that, whether or not a field tip is actually that great at piercing armor. What they would also have, and I don't have here right now, are bodkin tips and needle bodkin tips for penetrating through armor, where we get to what I mentioned before, the enormous advantage of firearms. Those can sail through so many armored materials that would be available to the most post-apocalyptic opponents without any problem. While with arrows, you really need to draw a hard bow with a lot of draw weight, and you really need good arrows with proper tips and stuff like that. So defeating good armor with a bow is much more problematic than defeating an armor with a firearm. Even with a pistol, depending on the pistol and depending on the armor, of course. And sure, if we're talking about like mutants with 5 centimeter thick steel plates protecting them, made of hardened steel and stuff, or like a manhole as a chest armor, not every assault rifle will go through that, okay? You might need a 50 cal or at the very least 7.62, or I don't know if 5.56 will go through, but anyway, I digress. Bows would, however, still be a very, very popular choice for a lot of adventurers, for a lot of characters in the post-apocalyptic world, because of just how much bang for the buck you get there and how available they would be compared to other sort of projectile weapons. So this would be a very simple throwing knife kind of thing, just made from a piece of mild steel in this case. Not very good quality here, but something like this I think might also be popular, although not very useful, so maybe not that popular really. It depends on the character, okay? There are some trick shots from Adam Saladin, for example, on YouTube that could go that far and do some serious damage, but thrown weapons take a lot of practice, and while they can be deadly and useful to a post-apocalyptic adventurer, the range is limited. It's like 10 meters effective range for the most part, and after that it's kind of a kind of thing. So it would be more of an emergency situation kind of thing, or something like that. It would not really be a great primary weapon if we're talking about thrown weapons. Some weapons, some knives could be dual purpose, so you can use them for just fighting and also be able to throw them. But just thrown weapons, while super cool, and don't get me wrong, I think they're awesome, would not be a great choice for a lot of well-equipped post-apocalyptic adventurers. If we go even lower tech, here is a nail. It's a 9-inch nail without a head. So this could also be used as a thrown weapon. And by the way, YouTube, I don't condone violence, and I do not suggest that anyone actually do that. I'm just talking about a fantasy situation in a fantasy post-apocalyptic world, okay? So, this right here, a tool actually, a large screwdriver, or is it like a chisel? Maybe it's a screwdriver turned chisel, I'm not sure, but this could be turned by someone else into some sort of a shiv or thrown knife or both. Basically anything you will find in a prison will also be available in a post-apocalyptic world, because it would be very accessible and very easy to make or modify. Other knives that I have. A US Vietnam era K-bar knife. Your regular fighting knife. These would be very popular, because just carrying this around, it's not as big, but it is very useful in a fight up close. Carry it really anywhere, on your hip, on your belt, somewhere up here. And this is also a useful tool for cutting twigs or for processing an animal that you've hunted, stuff like that. Some things are just useful as weapons, and some are also useful as a tool. Moving on to the next point. This is actually, as I mentioned at the start of the video, a tool for processing trees. So when a tree has been felled, they would process the branches on it with it, like to chop them off, and it could also like put this end into the tree to carry it. So this is actually just something I got from a flea market. It's a tool, and I made it look a bit more scary by sharpening the tip here, or making it look sharpened by removing the rust. It's not actually sharp, at least not very sharp, because I just use it for photos and I don't want to injure myself. So something like this would be very, very devastating as a weapon. It's compact, you can hook with it, and this spike right here, that would go right into a zombie head. Even if they wear some sort of an not too good armor, it would go through it. I don't know if it will go through a steel helmet or something like this, but this is basically a billhook. Like the billhook from medieval times that would be like on a long stick. This is a skull destroyer. A bit of a problem with this is that it's really not that convenient to carry. If you imagine that this thing is sharp, like what kind of a sheath you make for it? You need like some sort of a custom sheath. It's not as convenient to carry as something like this. Did you notice I was carrying a machete all this time? Now granted, this is a LARP machete, which I have been carrying in this sheath right here. And I'm gonna just unpack a real one that has similar size and sort of a similar shape. Now this right here, would be a very, very popular choice. Matt Easton from Schola Gladiatoria has a video about choppy, heavy, short swords in the medieval time. And throughout history, short, choppy swords appear again and again. They seem to be a very popular choice. In fact, these designs date back, and this here actually quotes the falcata or the kopis, which are Greek swords. So even before medieval times, a short, about 50-60 centimeter choppy sword was a very popular choice. Why? Because it chops rather than cuts. It doesn't need like expert training like with a katana or something. It is also stabby. And even opponents wearing armor, when hit with this on a helmet, it would just ring their bell. It could be carried on the hip. It could be carried the way I've just shown now, on the back. To get around with this, it doesn't really get in your way all that much. This kind of stuff right here would be extremely popular, given that you would need a proper smith to make a good weapon. You would need some really good steel, and by the way, this one is, well, seeing the video by Jörg Sprave of the Slingshot channel about this particular model, I gotta say it's much better than I thought it would be, because it's really cheap. I bought it back then like for 25 euros, and I thought it's an absolute piece of crap, except for visual purposes. But it happens to be, for the price, actually not that bad. Of course, you can't compare it to higher level models, something made from good steel with good heat treatment and stuff like that. And that stuff is complicated. You would need a good smith to achieve a really good result when it comes to swords, to knives also, but swords even so much more. I think a lot of people underestimate just how difficult it is to make a really good sword. But these would be very popular, however not cheap. That's what I'm getting at. You would need to pay the crafting master to make you something like this in good quality. Kukri from Kabar. This is actually also a real one. And this would also be kind of a popular thing, although I think a bit less so than the other, because it has less reach. Which also means it's a bit more easier to carry still. It also, just as the other one, can be used for dual purpose, like chopping stuff. And if it's thick enough, this one is not, but there are some that are even thicker, for example, from zombie tools, which are just completely overbuilt, although not overbuilt for the apocalypse, just properly built for the apocalypse. They would be like even thicker than this. And with those you could even pry some doors and stuff if that's not too much of a heavy application and not too much of a pry job. And that is always good, because the more use you can get out of a tool and the more abuse it can take, the better it is for the apocalypse, where we assume a lack of resources and all of that and lack of time to maintain it. So a kukri like this, it kind of sucks for stabbing, but it's really good for chopping. Just another variation of the many different blades there would be in the post-apocalypse, and all the previous points I've named apply here as well. You would need someone to make those. Of course, when we're talking about weapons like these, there would be stockpiles of them lying around the mall or the weapons store or whatever, but as time goes on, they would break and get lost and whatever. So I'm just, talking about the general economic dynamics of the weapons market in the fictional post-apocalypse universe, I guess. So stuff like this would not be found around every corner. Here we have some sort of a wall hanger. I do not dare to swing it around because it might just break and the blade might fall out. So badly made props, as well as wall hangers and cheap swords, are actually dangerous to handle in the real world, let alone in a post-apocalypse. But if this was well made, something like this, a short, non-choppy sword like this, would also be very popular, because how nimble it is, because of how easy to carry it is. A crowbar. This one is actually brand new and didn't do anything to it yet. But as we have seen in Half-Life, this is pretty viable. Now, this is definitely not nimble, but hitting an opponent on the skull with this will do some real damage. And fighting against zombies, I would actually use this side much more than this, because this will just get stuck in the zombie skull, and then good luck. So this is pretty nice, and also this would be, I think, one of the weapons of choice for all the scavenger. This is designed for prying. Unlike any like choppy sword kukri kind of thing that you might have that might be okay for prying if it's fat enough, this is designed for prying. This has a lot of heft to it. It's not the best weapon around because it's like really not nimble. But given how much of a useful tool this is, scavenger stuff right here. This right here is an axe handle, and in here is just a metal wedge. And the axe head I have removed, I don't know where it is. I wanted to convert it into like a sort of a battle beak kind of thing, but never got to it. Anyway, this right here, just the axe handle with some metal in it, has a nice balance. It would be a very useful club. Now, clubs, maces, all kinds of blunt weapons would be extremely popular in the apocalypse, especially for the lower level characters. And when I say lower level, I don't necessarily am dissing your character that has a club or whatever. I'm just saying lower tech, lower income, lower status, if you will, doesn't necessarily mean it's a worse design. I'm just talking about their fictional place in the universe, okay? So if you have some sort of a raider with something like this, that would be very realistic, because like this is so easy to come by, and to make a blunt weapon, it takes much less technical stuff and knowledge and skill and effort than to make a really good sword. Like, there are worlds apart between these two. But this will still do some significant damage even against some sorts of armor, just like they did in medieval times. In fact, when faced with armored opponents, they would get their clubs. And clubs would remain, in one shape or form or another, would remain a thing throughout the whole medieval period. So, absolutely, this would be extremely popular. Moving on to this, I have actually a separate video about this where I slugged myself in the knee by accident. And this right here was a terrible idea. This just got stuck in the helmet I was testing it on. But stuff like this would definitely also be all over the place. Some sort of improvised beak weapons and improvised axes and stuff. I will get to my saw blade axe in a sec. Has some reach. It has a nice balance where it's really light, but this has some heft for like penetrating skulls and whatnot. You can strike with the backside. So improvised clubs and spiky clubs would be all over the place. This being not a good example aside, because like serrations on stuff that is supposed to penetrate the target, you'll just never get it out again. It's just bad. Okay, this is not the best design, but I think a lot of post-apocalyptic weapons that you see all over the place, which would not be really that usable but look scary, there would actually be a lot of them. Because not everyone understands how weapons work. It takes actually a lot of expertise and experimentation. A lot of nonsense weapons would actually exist. So I'm showing you a lot of such that have some sort of a merit to them today. But I think a lot of wasteland weapons would be there that do not make any sense at all or are just bad designs. And by the way, just because something is not a good design realistically doesn't mean it's a bad prop for your costume. We're still talking about costuming here, so just do whatever looks cool, whatever fits your character. Small axes, tomahawks. This one is actually made out of resin rubber thing. Very useful. Spike and also axe side. These tactical tomahawks are really not used by militaries or police anywhere. Like the only one that talked about ever using them was Icy Mike from Heart to Hurt channel. And he talked not about using it on a dude, but to clear window glass, so using it as a tool. However, I think in a post-apocalyptic situation or universe, these would be really useful and used a lot. Just like axes of all sorts were used in the medieval times. I keep repeating that, and that's because it's just a very good indicator. Would they use it in medieval times? Well, if yes, they will probably use it in the post-apocalyptic times as well. And by the way, this would be like a sort of a combat axe. Well, this plus the actual axe head for a wood chopping axe would be a tool axe, and of course there would be a buttload of tools that are used like weapons without any modification to them, just like medieval peasants would use. And just like medieval peasants, the people using them would do some developments to them to turn those peasant tools into weapons, such as the billhook, which originally was an agricultural tool and then was turned into a weapon. If you don't know the difference, weapon axes are usually lighter and slimmer, while tool axes, especially wood chopping axes, are heavier and are not that nimble. Tomahawks like this would be very useful, especially in combination with shields. And of course you could also combine swords with shields, you could combine anything with shields. This is my very old LARP shield that is falling apart. And this would be supremely useful, especially in a zombie apocalypse to push them away, but also in any other sort of a situation, universe where the adventurer is fighting something that can be blocked with a shield. This is so useful, and it is so beginner friendly compared to other medieval-ish weapons. Because with a shield you just have it on your arm and you just, you block stuff. It's very, very intuitive. Although good shield fighting, Scalagrim has great videos on that. In the thumbnail you see that this, or let me do it with a sword. This would be realistic. Not this, where they swing their shield out. But anyway, shields with any sort of a other primary hand weapon would be extremely popular and extremely useful for any sort of a character that fights a lot and like doesn't carry a rifle. Or the cool thing about all of this, about the post-apocalyptic setting, maybe you do have an assault rifle, but it doesn't have a lot of shots. So additionally, you're carrying a small shield on your belt, and on the other, in the other hand, beneath the shield, you have a sword, so you can put away your assault rifle because you want to conserve ammunition or you ran out of ammunition, and then you have a shield, and then you fight with shield and sword or shield and axe or whatever have you, or even shield and pistol. That would also work. Block the blows from the raiders attacking you with a shield, shoot them with a pistol. Why not? So shields of all shapes and sizes, but especially I think of this size and maybe a bit bigger, would be extremely popular for fighting people in the apocalypse. In the Slavic regions, this is known as the sapurka, the sapper's shovel. And this was used in trench warfare by all nations, I think, because this is essentially sort of like an improv axe. They would sharpen it a bit more, and this would go through skulls. The soldiers in the trenches would have this anyway for digging, and this is another one of those things. I don't think in the apocalypse, it depends on the setting, it depends on the story, it depends on the situation, but I don't think too many characters would be interested in digging all that much all the time. It's not like trench warfare would be all over the place, and trench warfare and the need to dig was why soldiers in the real wars and armies were issued those in the first place. And this here can be collapsed, by the way. If I unscrew this here, collapse this to make it more portable, dual purpose item, which makes it more desirable because you're gonna be carrying a lot of stuff as a post-apocalyptic adventurer. So if you need to dig sometimes, but also you need to bash in some zombie skulls, well, here you go. This is an option. It wouldn't be my choice, but hey, this exists. Now granted, this was designed to look cool rather than look functional, because this, like, what is that even? There was also this big 9-inch nail that I've put aside protruding from here to make it look even cooler. But just imagine this would be more functional than it is. Like this spear right here. Spears would absolutely be a thing. I mean, it's a sharpened stick, essentially. And they would come in all sorts of technological levels and shapes and forms and sizes, because it's very intuitive, very easy to use, very easy to manufacture, and so on and so forth. Just like in medieval times, spears would be very, very, very popular. Basically outreach every melee opponent. Of course, it doesn't use you very much if you get shot with a bow or an assault rifle. Oh, look! A medieval sword. Now, this is a LARP sword, but actual medieval weapons, be it from a museum or reproductions, or when people who really know their stuff in the post-apocalyptic universe would just reproduce them. If you have a smith who knows his shit, he would just copy some medieval designs or do things that are really inspired by medieval designs, because those people had it figured out, and the result of that was medieval weapons. So actual medieval weapons, like I'm not saying I recommend using actual medieval weapons for your costuming, because it just might look odd. It's definitely one of those things that seeing in a professionally made movie or in a computer game, in a professional production, seeing a actual medieval weapon now and then is kind of cool, but if you do it for your costume, it might just look out of place, like, because on the meta level, the level where other people know you're a nerd doing costumes, it would be like why do you have your medieval sword on your post-apocalyptic costume? However, if we think it through logically, for all the reasons I just named, you have those things in a museum, you have those things as reproduction, and they make great weapons. You don't need to make them all rusty and spiky and improvised and blah. Medieval weapons would absolutely work in the apocalypse. It's just very difficult, if not almost impossible, to pull off well in a costuming situation. That's why you don't see it a lot. That's why I also haven't done this before. Now, let's move on to this one. There is a sheath that I made. I also have a dedicated video about this axe. Now, this is a saw blade axe. For those of you who didn't watch the video, yes, the teeth make much more sense this way around, and I have blunted them since the video, so I don't cut myself accidentally. So this would actually be a much more realistic version of the saw blade axe. This is just heavy enough for one hand to deliver devastating strikes, and this is not a bad kind of steel. It's not super duper great, I think, because it might be a bit too thin, although there are historical medieval weapons axes that are not much thicker. That said, in an apocalypse I would want something with a bit more blade thickness to it. If you're interested in a full building process, as well as another video showing it in action, tested on different kinds of things, then check out the videos on my channel. For now, I'm just gonna say that, of course, improvised weapons like this, like the classic post-apocalyptic weapons that come to mind, and the saw blade thing is super classic, just usually it's a full saw blade and on a straight handle, but saw blade weapons and other weapons improvised from stuff that's lying around, of course, would also be a thing, just not all of them make sense and not always the way you thought. Like, a lot of people are saying like, oh, but this way it would like rip skin and blah blah blah. Yeah, it would also get stuck in the raider, in his skin, while going this way has a different effect. It's more like a serrated blade then. So let's put this aside now and see what else we have. And we do also have another thing that I have a dedicated video about. By the way, I also have a video about this spear with its entire costume that went with it. But I also have a dedicated video about this hammer right here. Now, this is improvised from random junk that I found in my junk crate. This used to be like a heavy hook for like hooking onto things, for lifting things. And this is rather authentic. This would do some actual damage. Now, if I were building this again, I would angle this a bit more down, because as it goes through an arc, you can see that this constantly, because it's straight, it constantly remains outside of this circular arc. This is why the Rabenschnabel, or the Bec de Corbin, the historical weapon this was inspired by, has a curved beak. And as you will see in the dedicated video about this, this right here just gets stuck in things. But hey, this just aesthetically looked cooler, so I left it like this. And I think weapons like this would be also very popular and very available. Now, what kind of a character would this be for? Some sort of a melee warrior, and this would be their primary weapon. Because something big and long like this, it's just not very comfy to carry around. Like, where do you even put this thing? Like, okay, you could make some sort of a loop on your belt for it and walk around with it like this, but this is not a secondary weapon. Of course, there could be some crazy combination where someone has a long assault rifle and also this, but like, come on. And in fact, in the medieval times, then they also had small hammers. A bit bigger than this maybe, sure. But this would be also a devastating post-apocalyptic weapon. It's just not, except for a zombie apocalypse setting, this just doesn't look very interesting. Of course, there are also some interesting variation where people have made axes from those. So this gets heated up and flattened out and ground to be an axe head. Maybe even things like this with some other handle attached to them, as Shadiversity, a channel which you should watch if you don't know them yet, has recently shown. It would kind of work. I just don't think it's very great or durable, because the teeth on the saw would bend and like, I don't know. It wouldn't be my weapon of choice. But getting back to the fact that not each weapon would be designed very well or be very durable or perfect for that matter, like people would also use whatever piece of metal they really have to improvise whatever weapon. This has been a very long video. I don't know what else really to say, and I feel like I've said a lot of things about a lot of different weapons without going into depth on any of them, which kind of goes against my nature. But the point of this video was to talk about just like every kind of item and every item that I have here. I actually skipped a couple because it's just getting way too long. So thanks for watching. Subscribe to my channel, leave a like. If you like my content, please support me on Patreon. It's linked in the video description. Also linked in the video description is the Nuclear Snail community group on Facebook. You can post your stuff there, ask questions, and also never miss my updates in there. So if you want to join, go ahead and join. Other than that, have fun crafting, and until next time,